The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. You're going to have a great time today. We have Bill Davidson. The video is called Painting Simplified. Enjoy.
Hi everybody, it's Bill Davidson. How we doing? We're going to have a fun video shoot and we're going to try to make it lively and enjoyable. We're going to really learn some things and talk about a whole bunch of different fairly new concepts because I've been picking these up as I've been going through time. So let me just say this, it's hard, there's no audience here and it can get very boring and I'll never forget this. I'll try to keep it moving and I'll continue to talk as much as I can because I've also learned that everybody knows that if you're watching something and at the same time you're hearing it, you learn way, way faster. So if I'm not talking, you're probably not learning. But to keep it moving, as I say, there's no audience here, so there's no laughter. But I want you to understand this. I was at a workshop one time and the instructor was actually teaching, and during the teaching part of it, he had on some real slow music and there'd been no talking for about 30 minutes. And this fellow jumped up and said, "Kill me now." The whole place uproared with laughter. So I know these can be a little bit boring, but we're going to try to move through it, keep it going, have a few jokes and really get going. Now to get down to business, let me kind of tell you where I am. So I've been painting for about 10 years. And what happened with me was, and I saw this at one of the Plein Air conventions, a fellow named George Carlson got up there and he says, after 10 years, you really need to reinvent yourself. So I had reached a point where there was some boredom in my life, or in my art actually, and I felt like I needed to really shift things up. And so when I did that, and what I did was I went in and refocused my efforts on how to make paintings really better. And what it turned out to me was, within 1 year, without changing anything else, I had more than doubled my sales in my galleries. That's with the exact same galleries, not doing any special shows or anything of that type nature. So what I learned is that I can actually go in and do things like that, and I'm going to tell you everything that I did so that it helps you build those type of results. I'll also distill for you as I go through this. I've taught probably over 150 workshops, and what I do is I'll have each one of the students or the whole class, I'll have them do it one way, then do it another way, then do it a third way, until we figure out what's the simplest process that's the easiest for people to learn as they're growing. That way we're not doing it the hard way or things of that type nature. So as we go into this, I want you to realize I'm going to keep talking, I'm going to keep trying to explain, but I'm also going to give you easy ways to do things. In other words, as far as I know, my processes may be a little different from somebody else's, but whatever process works for you. There's good instructors out there and it's a matter of taste and processes. But I've distilled these over years and I've tried to communicate them as simply as possible. A lot of people know me that I've run into over the years as an artist. So years ago, I'm a recovering trial lawyer, as I would say. So what I tried to break it down and communicate things as simply as possible. And I think if that can happen and somebody can talk while at the same time they're painting, that's the fastest way to get your growth going, and it helps you to critique your paintings down the road so that you just don't understand it. Now, when you're learning things at first, it's very difficult to understand what the artist is doing. That's why I do a lot of talking and try to make sure that you understand it. If you do understand the whys, it makes it very easy then to self-critique yourself. And I want to talk about something else as we're going. I will say this: I was the worst artist you have ever seen. So if you don't think you could do it, I'm the living proof. And what you should be able to do is talk to yourself and go, if Bill Davidson could have done it, then I can do it. You're probably more talented than I was, and you probably started at a higher level. So it's one of those things where you have to believe in yourself. As we go through the video, I'm going to weave in all kinds of things about neuroscience. I'm a researcher and a very analytical person. So what I do is I try to find, how do you deal with your mind to where you become a higher performing artist, kind of like a higher peak athlete? So what you're doing is you're talking to your brain, and the studies that have come out based on neuroscience now say that what can happen is this: the tools of how you paint or what you do are very important, but just as important are the tools of how you're talking to yourself, what your mindset is, and how you really talk and form beliefs that are really going to help you to become a better person and a better artist and feel really, really good about where you're headed. Now, as I go into what I think, I will tell you this about how I dealt with more than doubling my sales and what I did with my paintings. One of the things is I started to get a lot more energy in my paintings, and I started to really pay attention to the values and more expressive brush work and enhance a little bit of the color. So it doesn't take that much to really increase what you're doing. Let's first talk just a little bit about inspiration. And I'm going to relate this to the energy I'm talking about in the paintings. But so as I first talk about it, let's go to somebody like Einstein, somebody who's really intelligent person. I always like to go to the best sources. So I usually get my neuroscience from writers and professors at Harvard, and I also look to Einstein and people like that. So when I talk about energy in the paintings, it's a unique, odd thing. Now, at first when I heard that rocks have energy in them, it's just compressed energy. So I do believe that you can create an energy in your paintings, and it's like Nikolai Fechin said, it's an organic whole, so that people actually resonate with those when they're looking at the paintings. So if you go to Einstein, Einstein said, everything is energy. That's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy, this is physics. So as I start to look at a painting, what I'm thinking about is, how can I get that type of energetic feel I feel and that passion I feel for the painting somehow conveyed into the painting? And for me, it's more like an energetic type look, and those are the type paintings I like. Now that's a matter of my taste. Everybody else has taste. Now I also go to Joseph Campbell, who wrote the book, The Power of Myth, and he goes, passion will move men beyond themselves, beyond their shortcomings, beyond their failures. So when you're getting bored or you're struggling or you're having trouble, you need to think about your passion. If you can keep your passion a nose ahead of the work, then what's going to happen is you'll just keep moving through things. It's great to feel that sense of wonder, that sense of passion, and that's what keeps you going as an artist. That's why you do it. You're probably a risk taker. Now we'll go to Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill has this to say: success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. So when I hit that 10-year period, I had lost my enthusiasm, and I knew I had to revive it. And so that just means going deeper. So what I've learned over time is that art and life is like a spiral. It's the same thing coming up over and over. You just start going deeper and deeper, and you tend to get better and better with these things. Then if you go back to Einstein, and he'll say this, that actually imagination is more important than knowledge. For knowledge is limited to all we know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there will ever be to know and understand. Art is not limited just to the knowledge and tools I'm going to talk about here. That's why I think the area of the energy in a painting and dealing with those type things can really make a painting come out better. Brushwork to me is very, very important. Energy in the painting, very, very important. What I want to say is this: the tools become very easy to work with if you believe you can do it. Your beliefs are very, very important to you. And you may not think so, but they now have proven through neuroscience that if you can actually tell yourself that you are going to do a better job, and you look at the positives in the way you paint and those type things, that you will actually perform better. So they did something like this. They took school children and they told them that they were better, that they were really good and talented. Those school children performed better during that year than the other school children, even though they did not have above average intelligence. So how you talk to yourself when you step up to that canvas and you get ready to paint is very important to what you do. So you need to kind of, even if you have to say, well, if Bill Davidson did it, I started better than he did, that's a great thing to do. So when I teach a workshop, it's always about how do I get people to feel good about themselves, how do we get a good energy. And that brings up one other thing. When you are around people that are of like interest and you're doing like a workshop or you're around friends or study groups, you perform way better than going into your room by yourself. They did that piece of neuroscience study at Harvard Law School, where they found out that the people that participated in the study groups actually did better than the people that locked themselves in the library. So it's that's counterintuitive for me, but now I understand why. If I'm around people that are painting and good painters, or I'm in workshops, it becomes very, the information's just exchanging and exchanging. So it's very interesting to me. When I'm in the workshops, I make it a point to go to the dinners and to talk with everybody, and I encourage everybody to go to those after the hard day of work. People talk, they get better. It actually builds relationships. We teach a workshop now over in Europe every year, and the people sign up for it right away when we announce the next one. It's because they're forming bonding relationships and they're starting to get together, and it's helping people become better artists. Luckily, I've had a lot of good people take classes from me, and now I'm starting to see how they're doing. They're doing fantastic, a lot of them. And so it's just a great way to go. They connect with each other. I encourage study groups. I think that's something you need to do too. Now let me talk a little bit about where it is. People go, well, art, is it a necessary thing? I had a theologian professor of theology that was at a college, and I said, well, how important is art? And she actually said, and this is a Benedictine nun, she said, Sister Morris Allen said, that art will save the world because the religions are too polarized. Art also, there's enough studies now that prove that art will save you. So if you're struggling in whatever you're doing, you need to get back into your art. It also has a very beneficial effect. Neuroscience also says this. It says that if you watch TV for more than 30 minutes, you start going down, you start losing energy. If you're engaged in any type of hobby or habit or creative work, you start increasing your energy. So all those things are really good reasons to stay in it. Let me talk just a second about habits. So this is another little tidbit. So one guy said, well, I wouldn't play my guitar. I bought it and I was going to learn. So what he did was, he had it in his closet. Little things make a big difference. When I run into people that have been in workshops, a lot of them will go, well, I'm just not painting enough. What he did was, he set his guitar up on a stand in the room. Then he did it every day. Make it easy on yourself, whatever you have to do, okay? Sometimes it's hard to face a blank canvas. Get started, get going. Now we're going to talk about some of these things, and we're going to have a little fun. because I want to try to keep some jokes going and things like that. It's hard to do when you're in this. But there's a lot of learning that's going to go on. Take your time, reset, come back, replay something, paint along with me. I'm going to take this painting that I'm doing, and the reason I'm using this painting is I set it up so if you're painting a barn or a foreground or a little mountain in the background or a little village, you should be able to do all of those things from this one painting. This is a made-up painting for that reason. So I've included a background village, I've included reflections, a little stream, I popped the light, we're going to change some values, and I threw some clouds in, although I've dealt with those in way more detail in previous workshops or in previous DVDs, one on making paintings glow and other on clouds. But we'll get a little bit of that, not as much as these other things that we're going to deal with. But I'm going to put in here everything related to how I changed my paintings and how they really increased my sales. And so it made it really good for me, and I'm much more enthused now and ready to go. So hang with us. It should be a lot of fun. And let me know what you think when this thing's done. We always love the comments that come back on them. Appreciate it. Let's go. Okay, and we're back, and just a couple of things I want to talk about. One of the things that also became really important, and that I noticed this happens in the workshops all the time, what I did was I started taking bigger risks, and these bigger risks became more important to me because that's what got me the more energy in the paintings and keeps things going. I'm going to show you how to do that and how to deal with it. It doesn't mean you have to take the hugest risk, but at least take 5 to 10% more. And when I'm teaching a workshop and I walk up to a painting, that is probably the number one thing that I see. People won't push it. They're not pushing it fast enough or far enough. And if you're not pushing those type limits, you're never going to change how you're painting, and you're going to be stuck in the same scenario the whole time. The other thing I want to talk about is mixing color intuitively. I'm going to give you 4 questions to ask when you mix colors. And this is the best way to mix colors because you'll mix a better variety. You'll learn to just be able to grab them and move. You'll be able to work off any color palette. Now, just a word of caution, people go, well, how come I'm in a workshop or I can't keep up with these things? The people that have painted for 25, 30 years, they know all this stuff intuitively. They're way ahead of the program. So it just takes a little bit of more simplified process at first to kind of build you up and kind of get you going. Intuitive color mixing to me is the way to go. It's very hard when mixing colors to set up recipes. Now we're going to talk about design, and I'm going to show you what I consider to be the easiest way to design and how it can help you flow through a painting and do stuff like that. So what I've done is, let's first talk about just generic parts of design. And this is kind of easy to look at. So if I talk about design, it's fairly simply to say 1, 2, 3. That's the most boring painting ever set up because everything is an equal. I have a dark, a light, and a mid-tone right in there. What happens there is, if this was an abstract painting, it would be totally boring and unrelated. Nobody would want it. But if I shift it, and I still have over 60% in a mid-tone, and then say less than that percentage in a dark, and then even less than that, less than, say, under 40% in a light area, this becomes an interesting abstract design. And that's what all paintings should be built upon if you want to try to keep them interesting. Now, it looks neat when you're kind of dealing with this and you're dealing with the shapes. One of the interesting things I found about this, though, is that if I stand back and look at this as I created it, if I flip this upside down, I've created a seahorse. So I can play with these shapes, and I only need to play with them on the edges to make them different. There's a little bit too much scraggly lines, so I would probably shift it a little more, maybe connect these 2 lines over here, darken that up just a hair, and watch what happens. You can start to see. Now, some people are really gifted with shapes. Other people are really gifted with color. And some people are gifted in value. But you're not gifted in all three of them. I've never seen anybody come into a workshop that was absolutely could do all three right off the bat. So just by uniting these two right here, look what happens. It starts to get a better look. And then if I want to get rid of I just come in and play on an edge, I can start to play with my seahorse here and maybe make it a little better looking so it doesn't look like a seahorse, okay? So these are the simple things of design. Also, it's nice to try to connect the darks as much as possible, and it's also nice if you can to connect the lights. I'm more worried about the darks than the lights. There's a great painter, Jim Reynolds. He died, he's got a great book out. He took a lot of his great $50,000 paintings and everything, and he critiqued them all right before he died in his book. And almost every time, he would find a dark bush that was separated out from the other dark bushes, and he said if he had it to do over again, he'd connect that dark bush to another bush and create a better rhythm. So that becomes very important when you're designing. Another guy wrote a good book, Harley Brown wrote one, where he showed how if you united your dark shapes, how it helped to really centralize and keep the painting together. And basically, this is a mountain scene out in Jackson Hole. And so this was a demo for a workshop out there. And see how the darks are kind of connected all the way through. I have my midtones, and then I pull out my lights. So you can see all the big shapes. And that's how you really learn. A funny, great guy, great artist also. Ned Mueller one time told me in a workshop, and I probably took over 20 workshops in a matter of 2 years. I wanted to get there fast, plus I liked it. And I used to go, and I knew I didn't know anything, so I'd just be like the worst student in the class, but I didn't care. That's the best place to be. So what he said was if you did value studies for 2 years, you'd catch up or get way ahead of people. So that's why I started working on these tonals. For me, I like paint so much that what I do is I come in and I just do it this way, and then if I don't like it, I flip it around and I wipe it off and I play with it. That way it's not too important to me at that point in time. The other way of dealing with it, and I did it on this one, was I took a picture of this and I added a section above it, and I went into what's called Art Set Pro. And so what it is it's a program where you can get out a brush and paint on it. It's fairly easy to use. And I added a section to the sky up here, and I put a bigger sky in here, and I raised the mountain up, and I created the design that works for this painting over here. So this painting design, if you can see, is really a better design than what's going on in this one. This one feels a little cramped, a little crowded. This one is more open. It's probably going to work better, so it is a better type feel. So when you're designing like that, it's these big shapes you need to worry about. However you do it 3 or 4 different ways so you can kind of get a feel for what's going to look better. The design is one of the most important things. If you don't get the design right, a lot of artists will tell you there's no sense in going forward. So what makes a big difference is this. If you're painting a 40 by 40 or a 30 by 40, and you're out there and you go, oh my God, if you get that wrong and you ship it off to a gallery and it doesn't look as good, it may not sell. But if you get it right the first time, it saves you so much headache, it's unbelievable. And I think that also, so I paid a little more attention to that, but more importantly, I really started to put more energy in my paintings. And what we'll do is we'll play with this. All my lead-ins go in, and I have a diagram we'll throw up here that'll show you how every lead-in works in the painting. So this is my focal area, which clearly it is, and then we're going to talk about that too. This lead-in leads into the focal area. This cloud comes down here, hits there, comes down that tree line into the focal area. This tree throws me into the focal area. This line runs me down into the focal area. And I put a little village up here in the mountain because I want to show you how to do it, okay? And so that's a secondary area of interest. and then we'll play with these values. But notice how all these darks are kind of connected as we go through the painting. So that'll cover the design portion of it. We'll talk about it a little more as we go through it. And we're going to go through a bunch of things as we start to play with this painting and show you how to take this painting to a bigger painting and really make it better than the studies that was done. And I repeat this again because I want you to understand, this is painted and made up for the purposes of teaching. Because if I just use another painting or I bring another image up here, it won't have everything in there I want to get into this video. And I want to get a whole lot of lessons in here so that we'll have somewhere to go so that it's a worthwhile video, and hopefully you like it and we'll get somewhere good. Okay, thank you very much. All right, folks, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the materials we're going to use because they're kind of important. We've done the design and we've done a couple other things, and we'll talk more about that as we move through it. But let's just go through the tools kind of quickly so that you can kind of understand where we're going to be. One of the first things I want to talk about is my canvas. So my canvas is usually, it's a linen mounted on a board. Canvas can be critical because if you get something that's too slippery, the paint will slide all over it if you get something that's too thick. So canvas is also personal to you. Now let's talk about, I'm a gambling man, so I'm going to talk about the paints I use and why I use each one of them. And we'll go right down here to this. So I use the titanium white. Gambling has a real good consistency with their paints. Their tubes don't puncture, things like that. Most of the time you'll find that student grade paints are a little weak sometimes. But as you start using more professional paints, you'll find that I like gambling because of the consistency. They're real good paint, and I don't open up once I travel and find them all broken up. I use the titanium white. Now I'm going to talk about 4 grays I use because they just make things faster. You can actually paint with titanium white, cadmium yellow medium, some type of middle red, ultramarine blue, viridian, and that should be able to get you most of the colors except some of the colors that are in flowers and a few other things. And I can tell you this, most really good painters can paint. A lot of times when I'm teaching a workshop, somebody won't have all the paints, so you get used to paints. And that's why I'm going to talk about intuitive color mixing, because you can actually, once you get used to anything or see it out there, you can start to mix fairly fast. That's why most professional artists that have been out there a while could use almost anything. But this makes it a lot easier. I've watched a lot in a lot of my workshops. I've watched people paint with different paints. These grays help a tremendous amount. So there's this radiant blue by Gambling, which is a beautiful blue, a buff titanium, a Caucasian flesh, and a Portland gray medium. These grays are used easily to knock down real bright colors, and they're very handy. You'll see I can go to them real quick. I've lined up my paints. A lot of people set up their paints different ways, but because values are so important, I decided about 1.5 years ago to have everybody in the workshop start lining them up based on value. It really helped people with their painting. So I have my lightest colors working into my darkest colors. And I think you'll find that helpful if you try that. As I keep going, I get a cad yellow medium. This is a cadmium green, a golden ochre. Now this is a little bit different from the old ochres. It's not as earthy. It's easy to use. It's a real clean color. Perylene red, I can bend it warm, I can bend it cool. So that's the only red I have on my canvas, on my palette. But it's very easy to bend and make some great colors. Then I go with the olive green. The reason I use this olive green, it makes a great green and shade. It's almost like a perfect value of shade in a tree. It's a warm, so it's really easy to play with. And then I have viridian green right next to it, which is the cool. So I can throw viridian into it and cool it, or I can warm it any way. Red is also a great modifier color, so it's easy to use. Then I have what's called asphaltum, A-S-P-H-A-L-T-U-M. I find it much better than a burnt umber, and it's real easy to use. You can throw white into it and mix a nice brownish beige. It's a real good color. Ultramarine blue, and I've started using this chromium black. I stayed away from black forever because it knocks your colors down real fast, but this chromatic black is really, it's a different black. It's not as strong, so it doesn't knock the color out. For this painting, I'll use cobalt teal for the shutters, and it's also great for painting like water, especially in your coastal areas like California or the Bahamas or things of that type nature, or even mountain lakes way in the back. Those would be the colors. They're all gambling colors. I love them, like I say, because of the consistency. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the brushes. So what I do is I have a set with rosemary, and there are these rosemary brushes, and they work for almost every painting I do. Actually, they do work for every painting I do. Now, I use these because they're mostly a flat type brush. They have a real sharp edge, so I can go in and create a fine line, and I can scrub with these brushes. So they work really well. I think I go from the smallest, a 00, all the way up to a number 16. They're very easy to use. You'll see me using them throughout this demonstration. I also have one very soft one in case I really need to soften edges. And we're going to talk a lot about edges and how important they really are, and how that's the last thing you probably pick up on, but how really important, and they're a great thing to play with the rest of your life. But these are great brushes. I scrub with them. I can use them. I will tell you one thing. You can clean them out with the Gamsol, and I always use the Gamsol, but also if you just take some Vaseline and you dip it into the Vaseline and really push it down on your palette, you'll be surprised how much extra paint you can get out of it. So it's really helpful for cleaning. Then as I use a palette knife or two, as long as they're to whatever purposes, I may have 2 or 3 of them, and they're easy to use for putting paint on, creating edges, I'll show you how to use those. In addition, I use various paper towels. Usually I use the shop because they don't leave a lot of lint. We'll scrub off with these things, so I find a good paper towel is kind of nice. I can use a Bounty or I can use this. I prefer these, they're a little bit softer. Makes a big difference. All right, now that we've covered the tools, let's talk a little bit about tonal washes. Now, I've showed you the earth tone tonal washes that I used before, and I find that if you're not great at thinking about everything or designing and putting your shapes in, it's probably best to go with the warm tonal. But I've already showed you what those look like. So I'm going to do a color wash this time, and what you're doing is you're throwing another ball in there to juggle. So you are throwing in the color part of it, and it's requiring you to think about more than one thing at a time. Now usually, and this is because of lighting, I always wear a hat when I'm in the studio. It just helps me to see better. This is the only hat I have with me, so I'm going to put this on. It just keeps, what you want to do before you set up is, and like we were talking about the neuroscience thing, you want to talk to yourself about how good you're going to do. You're going to try to make yourself feel better about it, and you're going to talk about the good things that you've done in prior paintings. Because if you go in with a negative attitude, it will affect you totally, and you'll be surprised how important that really is. I want to talk about, in honor of Everett Raymond Kinsler, who recently died. He was a fabulous artist, and I have a kind of a liking to him because he had a great sense of humor, and he was probably the first one that ever recognized. I got my first big award from him, and so I'm kind of prone to him. But he would start like this. His sense of humor was so good. He'd go, "This will be the greatest painting ever painted of this subject matter." And he'll stop back and he'll go, an hour later after painting, he goes, "Well, maybe this will be the greatest painting I ever painted of the subject matter." Then about towards the end of it, he'd go, "I hope I can save this thing." So look, keep your sense of humor as you go into these things. Take your art seriously, but don't take yourself seriously, and it makes it a lot more fun and enjoyable. So as we start to go into this, I'm going to show you how I would play with the tonal part of it, and at the same time I'll start mixing up and dealing with a little bit of the color and a little bit of the shapes. Once again, if you really want to focus on things, like it's very easy to just work on your shapes and do a good tonal. And even if you do a good tonal and it's just the browns, you're learning design and shapes. And it's just like it was said a long time ago by Leonardo da Vinci. He would have his people work on their shapes and build their repertoire of shapes just by copying various shapes that were the stains on the walls. So it's up to you. The more shapes you get and the better you get at shapes, the more interesting the shapes become, the better your paintings are going to become. And that ties in with the design. So we'll just be throwing a little bit of a color wash in. Now let's, so for these things, I like to start with a bigger brush. I like to get freed up. I'm one of those type painters. I want to get some movement going. I want to get excited, and I want to get my energy up before I get ready to go into this thing. So one of the things that just real quickly I'm going to touch on before if you are dealing with lines and things of that type nature, if I show you a straight line, that is just a boring line. So that's the same thing for shapes. So if I take a line like this and I start to get creative with it and play with it and move it around a little bit, it starts to become an interesting shape. And I also have to change that shape is to get on the edge of it. So I don't have to go back and create that shape. So your sweet spot would be this one. Then this one would turn into something like so chaotic, it would have no interest. It would just be too chaotic. So you want to be in this sweet spot area right up in here. Now why is that so important? Because when you get into all your lines and you get into your shapes, it becomes hugely important when you're looking at this painting to make sure that you don't have geometric shapes or too much chaos going on in your painting. Now, one of the important things that's really interesting is, as I start to do this, you will learn to see better. And this is what I've noticed in the workshops over and over again. If I can get people to get focused on these big shapes to begin with and think about where their focal area is, everything starts coming together much quicker. It's funny though, art is a process, so you need to hear things like a million times, and you need to hear it over and over again, and for some reason you don't hear it until you're ready to hear it. So I may spew out a lot of information here, but you'll think I maybe not said something, and then you may pick up on it later. Now, it's always another interesting thing too. You could get up here. Most artists that have been painting for a while can get up here and start going and do demos for almost a month straight and keep talking about learning different things. So there is a lot to learn, but keeping a simplified process is really the way to go. So now that my paints are all laid out, I'm going to look over here and I'm going to start playing with just a little bit of a design line. Now, if you're one of those people who likes to draw and do by line, that's great. And I've seen a lot of people that are real good at lines. I'm mostly a shape person, so I'll start with just some line hints just to get an idea where the composition will lie. And then I'll start playing with the big shapes. And what really becomes important here, folks, is that the shapes that are on the outline of these big shapes are really important, because how those lines read and the variety there and how those big shapes merge with the other shapes becomes hugely important. So if I'm going to go into here, I may start this canvas. I'm going to have to reset it obviously because I shifted to a vertical painting. And you notice that when I redesigned that painting, I completely redesigned the whole thing to get the clouds in better. So when I start dealing with something, and if I'm not doing those little sketches to lay it out, I like to do it right on the canvas, and that's just me. I will completely flip it, wipe it off. And one of the things you want to learn is, don't be afraid to wipe it off. Don't get too tied into this thing till you're sure your composition is where you want it to be. Like I said about James Reynolds, he would have he went back and critiqued his paintings, and he goes, yeah, that one was too compact. And that's kind of how I felt about the sky. The more of these shape issues you see, the better off you're going to be. So if I come in here, and let's say I just want to lay out a few lines so I can kind of see, so I don't get too far off in my shapes, I may come in and just real thin. Now, one of the things I really want you to understand is we're going to paint this painting from an idea of it doesn't have to be perfect when I begin. And that's one of the great things about doing this type of method. When I'm going to kind of hit this thing in different layers, and which allows you to paint right on the painting. And the reason art's so hard, even though the process will be simple, is this. As I start to lay it out, one of the things that's really interesting to see is that I may have these simplified processes in my head, and that's great. But with the simplified process, I also need to be able to understand that it gets more, to relate everything, it starts getting complicated. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay this in so that it kind of has a nice feel to it. I just put it in a few quick lines here so that I can get an idea. And if you noticed, I'm trying to get an idea of where my darks are. And so I'm just getting a real nice feel in here just to get a couple of lines in, and then I'll start getting back into my shapes again and trying to deal with my shapes. So it doesn't hurt to stay a little loose at first until you start getting the hang of things and see these start lining up the same. So I'm watching that. I may move that back a little bit. But I'm just trying to get an idea of where some of this stuff is in here right now before I really get into it. Now, the process is going to be this. As I'm dealing with it, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going real thin in multiple layers. And the reason for that is painting is all relative. So all the colors, all the shapes, anytime you change one thing, it's probably changing something else on the painting. That's what makes art more difficult. So it used to be that people used to paint and go right on it, put it on, leave it alone. In a way, that's okay. It's just hard to get a great painting. If painting is all relative, till I get a lot on here, until I get things on here working, anytime I change something, it's going to affect something else. In other words, like the color yellow. If I put blue next to yellow, all of a sudden the yellow looks greener. And it's the same with any other color. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to work through a process where I'm painting real thin, then hitting the next layer, then the next layer, and then finally a finish, so that you're building it up and you're starting to compare as things going. I'm talking about taking risk. So I'm going to change values and change things till I get exactly what I think makes the best looking painting. Now, when you're out plein air painting, that's one thing. Sometimes you may be out there painting just exactly what's out there. Other times you may be out there trying to move things around and get a decent, really good type painting to bring in. And so it's just whatever you're doing. If you're in a competition, obviously you got to paint close to what's out there, but you still want it. You can move the lighting effects around and things of that type nature. So if I'm just plein air painting to study, I'll paint exactly what's out there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a color and I'm going to put a little bit of red in it. And this red's great because what it does, I'm taking asphaltum and I'm putting a touch of red in it. And what I'm doing is I'm just going to start loosely building up this painting. And I'll get thinner as I go, but I want to get these darks in here and see where they are. So this is more of the color wash. I'm just getting some of the dark warms. In every piece of bush or tree, almost every time there'll be a piece of warm that sits up underneath all those greens. And it's important for you to know that, because that warm is not getting hit by the blue of the sky. So when you're talking about light, assuming everything's equal, you have direct light from the sun that comes in and hits something, and that's your direct light. And then you also have light filtered in from the blue sky. And then in your shade areas next to the light, you have some of that blue sky falling in it. And then sometimes that blue sky can't get up underneath all that earth material, so it'll be warm up in there. So you'll get a warm, dark spot a lot of times up in the shadow, and then you'll also get a cooler piece of shade, and then the light warm. Now it's important that you put warm and cool on both the light and the shade, because it causes the painting to scintillate. And I saw what Sargent did one time. He just stuck warm way up in there, and then he stuck a touch of ultramarine blue up in there too. So it helps the painting scintillate by having warms and cools everywhere. So as we start to get the wash in, remember, real thin. You want this kind of running. I used not to paint this way, so this has been part of the new process. Now I'm going to lay a little bit of some green in here. So I'm just taking a little bit of Viridian and mixing it into this mix. And we're going to lay some nice cool colors up in next to that warm a little bit. I used to have a paint with some really a fun guy. He and I had a great time going out painting. Fabulous painter. If you don't know who he is, you need to look him up. His name's Michael Lynch. But he is a super guy, super painter. And I'd watch him. He'd put his tonals on, or these type washes on, and he'd keep them so warm. And then eventually when he came over them with the greens, they'd just be gorgeous. Now people tend to eat up their dark, so just start to get a lot of it on there. Now if you notice, I'm working my way back in because I'd already designed this. I knew where my focal area is going to be. So these trees are going to go up a little higher. And then there's a lot of warm that'll run into this earthy area. See, if you stay loose like this, what it does, it helps you work your way into your painting. You start getting this nice feel for it. And you start to get a nice, like, relaxation of everything that's going on, and you're not afraid of this. Because remember, I can't make a mistake at this early a stage, because everything's so thin. I don't want it to get too sacred, where I'm worried about where I won't change something. You won't want darks right at the bottom of your painting or right, and you want it kind of move them up in a little bit, and then I can kind of still go with a nice interesting line. So I'm designing a little bit, but I'm just starting to get a lot of things flowing in here to see what this is going to look like. There's a little bit of warm. It's going to sit up underneath this water. So there's always that dirt on the bottom. It was funny, we were watching that, who was it? Bill Anton doing his demo one time at the Plein Air Convention. Who's a fat, and his was really loose and flowed like this. He just kept playing with the paint the whole time. And it made for such an interesting you could see that what was going on is he was working out the details as he went all the way through the painting. He kept playing with it because it's all so relative. It makes a big deal. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to go back into that mountain a little bit and just start to slide it in. I'm a little bit cool. I can see it on top of that, and I'm not worried too much, so I may put a little red in there. I grabbed a little bit of that Caucasian flesh, and now I'm going to put a little bit of Perylene red. I'm going to warm it up a little bit. I'm a little too cool, and I may be just a little bit too dark. So if I come back here, there, that's a better color. Now I'm doing this as basically a sunset scene, right in the evening, not a total sunset. So everything is a little warmer and a little redder. And if you have to go out, so the things that I want you to understand is it's much better to go out. And you'll see these colors. I get my color studies from being outdoors. I find it very difficult to paint a big painting inside if I don't have a color study, because the camera only picks up, if it's 30% of the color, I'm surprised. Plus you miss all of the really good parts. Anything could happen out there while you're dealing with that. So I'm just starting to lay it on. I'm keeping it a little bit warm, folks, just a little bit. And I'll start to eat up all the lid areas. And then I'm going to put in a little bit of the sky. So I'm really checking my big values is what I'm doing. If I get into this sky, and I will keep everything a little bit warmer at first, because remember, the cools can come over it. And the point here is to get up there and don't be afraid and just go for it. The reason I use this type paper towel, I can wipe it out real easily. So if I'm outdoors, this may only take 10 to 15 minutes to lay this out. And then I can start really playing with coming in for another layer. As we start to go, now I'll start to throw a little bit of different colors in there. We'll start to put a little bit of blue. It's nice to have it a little bit cooler towards the top of the painting. Warmth attracts your view, so you don't want the warmth way up top most of the time. So the eye will move towards a warm area. And then if I even want to get it a little bit cooler, I may just put a little more blue up in here, and I may drop the value here. I've learned one thing. If I drop this value and get it a little darker at the top, it moves you a little farther down into the painting if I have light down closer to the horizon. And don't get lazy on your color. So if I go, well, I didn't quite drop it enough, the closer I get now, the better off I'm going to be as I go. You can hear the brush going against that linen. Now, one thing that you need to be careful of is it's nice. You don't have to push as hard as you think you do. I've noticed that really professional painters what they do is they have a real soft touch with everything. and you need to stay real thin at first, and you can get thicker later. So because I'm throwing in a little bit of color in here, I'm going to get a little bit cooler color. And because I've got these grays out here, I can stay in these values pretty easily. So you're always going to, when I'm thinking of it, what value? Is this value too light? Is it too dark? Because these are my big shapes, see? I'm watching this line to that. So this, because this is a break in a big value shape, this line is going to create the edge that works this line to that line is going to create how interesting the shapes are. So I have to pay special attention to this line. If I don't do that, what happens is this. The line will be uninteresting, and that'll make the shape. And the line is nothing more than where the two shapes meet. So I'll come back in and play with that line a little bit in a minute as I get my wash on. Same thing with the tree line. If I don't really carefully watch this tree line, then what's going to happen is, because it's a big dark shape, just so you see this, it's really interesting. If I want to see these shapes, and I really want to think about what I'm painting, I'm going to be looking at this shape, my sky shape, my mountain shape, then this big set of dark tree shapes. And then I'll use the dark and connect it through the water line coming forward. So the better, if I was to look at this real simply, I could go like this and start thinking abstract design and painting. And it doesn't have to totally connect, but it's nice because your eye will follow that lead in this dark tree line. So what I was talking about earlier was, let's say this is a grass plane right here. If I throw a bush right out in the middle of here, it's an isolated bush that just sits out there, and it kind of throws off your painting a little bit. So let's say I start working this, and I'm rolling up into here, and I'm starting to look at all these lines. And I start thinking, okay, my trees are always a little bit darker than everything else in the landscape. Now, most people, you can read John Carlson and he can set you a really good setup on how everything should work in the landscape, assuming getting away from local color. But it's important to realize this. The easiest way to explain it that I found is this, that the sky is usually the lightest part in the landscape, unless there's a house or something in there. The next darkest thing would, of course, be whatever's perpendicular to it. So whatever's 90 degrees to it, which would be trees. Then rocks and mountains are kind of angled toward the sky, so they're not quite as dark as the trees generally. Then you have the ground plane, which is flat. So just think of your brush when you're out there. These simple things will help you self-critique yourself. In other words, if you don't have your ground plane light enough, if you got it where a tree plane should be based on value, it's going to cause a mix-up in your paintings. It's not going to look right.
In painting Simplified, artist Bill Davidson's purpose is to teach you how to create an expressive, energetic, and exciting painting that goes way beyond the subject matter. What Bill shows you here is relevant to every landscape painting you'll ever do in your lifetime. It's a compilation of everything he has learned through his years of being a professional artist and what he has taught others in over 150 workshops that he's led. Bill has distilled many different processes and created proven systems that you'll find easier and faster to apply than what you're doing now.
And I want to take some risk because this is an educational video, and I want to show you what it's like to really come in and take some risk. And you know the saying that goes, values do all the work, color gets all the credit. Well, I'm going to show you why that really is. I used to think it just meant that values were like the darkness in the trees and the light, and they are. But what they're really talking about, and it's just taken me a long time to figure this out, is that the more you play with the values in the ground plane and the sky, and the more you focused in on your focal area and you're playing with those values, then you can set your mood up in your painting and really create a more dramatic painting.
You'll find Bill's color systems easy to use without the complications of most color theory teachings. Next, Bill demonstrates how to paint in stages, critical if you want to simplify your process while still creating knockout paintings. He'll also share some of the neuroscience behind how artists talk to themselves, sometimes self-sabotaging their efforts. Get your self-talk right, and you'll be painting more simply and joyfully. If you'd like to sell your art or sell more of it, you don't want to miss what Bill did to double his sales in just 1 year. This is information you can put to work for you right away. Holding nothing back, Bill brings you his best in Painting Simplified. Available now on DVD or digital to view on your computer, tablet, or smartphone.
Well, that was Bill Davidson and Painting Simplified, and you can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. And today, a special surprise. In the comments section, a discount just for you. Hope you enjoy it. Now let's get right to the interview with Bill. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes with Plein Air Magazine. Today we have Bill Davidson in the studio. Bill, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I'm curious about how this whole painting thing began for you, because you were in another career, and tell us about that career and then how that evolved into painting.
Well, I guess, you know, if you're a boy and you grow up, you're either doing sports or something, but back on the East Coast, especially in the Southeast, you didn't have a lot of art. And I was told I needed to earn a living at some point in time. So I became a lawyer, and I did trial work for about 10 years and realized I'd probably be dead by the age of 50 if I kept that up. I'm not an antagonistic fighting type person. So it was stressful? Yeah, it's stressful, and it's then we did a bunch of franchise. We had a small firm, did a lot of work. So met nice people, did a great, it was enjoyable for a while, got tired of it, and I knew, the funny thing is, right when you get to the peak of something, a lot of times you're ready to make a jump to something else.
Yeah.
So I started painting in between with a friend.
How did that happen? How did you decide painting?
Well, we just said, let's do something that's of interest to us, and we started doing that. And then I saw that, I like the outdoors a lot, and then plein air painters, and there really weren't a lot of them in the East Coast at that time. So they were out west, so I started taking workshops out west all the time.
How did you discover plein air painting at all?
It was an interesting thing. I'm not sure.
Well, that's not very interesting.
I know. Now that I think about it, I don't even know how I did it. It's like one thing. You step into something, and then you start looking around, and then you find something somewhere where you see somebody outdoors with their paint gear,
right,
and you go, I want to do that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to paint flowers really inside, and I'm not into portraits. I've done some of that, and I just wanted to be outside and paint.
Yeah.
So
who did you take workshops from?
Oh, gee, I probably took, now this is, some people, they call themselves workshop junkies. I took probably 20 something in a matter of 2 years.
20,
all of them on the west.
Yeah, but you were running a law firm. How did you get away and take 20 workshops?
I'd slide out like once every month or something and go I'd fly somewhere, take a 3-day workshop and fly back and be back at work.
Yeah.
I probably, the reason was there was nobody teaching plein air where I was, and I found that at that point in time, the best painters were located I never got as far out as California, which is surprising to say, but they were in the mountain areas and around Arizona and places like that.
So, who was the first workshop you took?
The funny thing is, the very first workshop I took was a guy named Ovanis Barbarian.
Oh, he's a good painter.
Well, he has beautiful brushwork, and I loved his brushwork, and I said I really liked the textures, and I liked the way that they moved. So I went out there. I had knee surgery like 10 days before. I went out there on crutches with one of those old French easels and drug it around. I mean, my knee was oozing out all kinds of gooey stuff, but you know, it was one of those it was a great experience for me.
Yeah, sounds like a fun experience.
It was. It was really fun.
So you took 15 workshops in 2 years. Isn't that a little schizophrenic?
A little bit.
I mean, isn't it, in hindsight, would you do it the same way?
No, it'd be nice if I had someone that had been a little closer by, or somebody I could have gone to on a regular basis, maybe, even if I repeated the same person for work and just branched out a little bit. I think you can get a little schizophrenic. I did do one of those ones one time where they have like 5 people in 5 days, and I went with a buddy, and after 3 days I said, we're out of here. So, I mean, we left because it was just, I was like, it was schizophrenic.
Well, because one person's telling you the opposite of what the other person's telling you.
Yeah, and then so sometimes, you know, if you're in a workshop where they're fairly consistent and you have 2 instructors, it's not bad. And I found that a lot of times some of the instructors can say the same things, but every now and then you run into one that's all of a sudden saying something very different from what you're used to hearing.
Well, that's one of the nice things about something like the plein air convention, where you can kind of get a sampler and see who you want to study under.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great thing about it. I've had people come to my workshops and say, you know, I could tell I wanted to take a workshop from you at the plein air convention.
It was your jokes.
Yeah. Well, I always say, take your art seriously, but not yourself. I mean, that's a hard line. So if you're not having a good time with it, it's going to show up in your painting somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's right. You're struggling and you're stressed.
Yeah, it's a pretty honest medium. But I think you have to, one of the things that I always found, I could watch a video, but I mean, I was almost guaranteed I'd fall asleep about halfway through. And so the hardest part with painting and teaching at the same time and doing a video is keep it entertaining, keep it moving, and be very informative. Like when I took, not many people would talk. So, and especially, and so I can say this, I was probably the worst painter that's ever picked up a brush when they started. I say this as a joke, but it was really true. The first time I painted trees, they looked like the Supreme Court buildings, equally spaced, all very boring, all equally looking. And so I realized that, but I had a passion for it, and I decided that, you know, and now I've read, this is a great thing, the worse you are when you start, the better you can become.
That's true.
But I think it's because maybe you learn the basics really hard and you struggle a lot at the first. And that reminds me when I'm in a workshop. So, you know, we're all kind of a little bit lazy. You can sit there and wait for the instructor, but I used to paint everybody's paintings in a workshop. I finally learned I wasn't helping anybody. If I paint on it if I feel it's necessary, but if I can talk them into doing it themselves, I'll let them struggle with it a little bit.
Yeah. You said you have a lot of people, you told me at dinner last night, you had a lot of people who repeat your workshops multiple times because they're learning from you in ways that they weren't learning in other workshops. You tell me about that?
Well, I think I talk a lot, so I try to explain the processes, and I've been watching people I watched what happens when we try the different processes. And I think people get comfortable with that, and then they don't feel any fear, and they feel comfortable in the whole environment. But playing with the processes and watching it and trying to give them really good things where they can self-critique themselves becomes really important. Because I also find this, that, you know, you can teach them how to paint a tree, and then there's so many different parts to the landscape. I mean, you could work with people for years. I've had people take 20 workshops from me.
Well, they say that a landscape is kind of like a giant still life with 1,000 objects in it, and you have, it's really a difficult subject to learn in the beginning if you really want to get form and proportion of all the objects that you're having to paint, plus the lights moving, plus everything else. So it's actually one of the most difficult things to paint.
Well, it's really, your taste gets better and better and better, and you start seeing really how skilled some painters really are.
So let's talk about that, the development of taste. I can't speak for you, but the path that I've seen so many people on is when they start painting, they want to paint a photograph. They want to be as close to representing that photograph as possible. Their colors are overly bright, overly garish, and then most of them over time start getting a little bit more painterly and maybe not putting as much garishness to their color and so on. What do you think is the process of developing taste?
You know, it's an interesting thing because I think some people still have different tastes, but when I was getting ready for this video shoot, I was trying to think what really makes a painting interesting, and I think it doesn't have to be the textural part, although for me, my tastes are textural, but I think it has to be this, and I figured it out that the more layers that are involved in the painting, the more interesting it is to everybody. And at first, I actually in the video, I put up a shot of what flat color looked like with just a few variations, but layered color becomes really exciting. And I think that's the one unifying piece that actually helps people, that makes paintings more sellable. So after 10 years, I got a little bored and I started trying to play with my paintings and getting more interesting and just do things. And I kind of pulled away from all the groups and all the shows and those type things. And I think you have to do that at some point in your career. I think they served me well to figure out how I nationally competed at first. But at some point, I just needed to pull out from everything. I'm not pursuing getting my master's stuff and things, and I'm staying away from all types of shows, basically, because I was going through a redevelopment process and trying to figure out something different. And when I finally got into it and I figured out, and I tried to get this energy in my paintings, in addition to the layers we're talking about, and so more subtle transitions in the colors, and I noticed that my sales remarkably, over a 1 year period with the same galleries, without doing any shows or changing anything up, more than doubled as a result of just playing with my paints and going back in there on my own and trying to get these energies and these layers in my paintings.
See, I think this goes to the idea of taking risks. Is that, you know, I've had the opportunity to interview a lot of artists in these chairs, and the one thing that seems to happen, the one thing that's in common, is there's a breakthrough moment when that artist breaks through the clouds, and it's because they were willing to not settle for where they were. They were willing to play and experiment and try new things and take risks.
I think that's the number one thing, and I think the only way, I mean, you're never going to become someone new if you're doing the same things. So, and it's very interesting that you'll know when you need to take some risk. You start getting bored. The antithesis of risk is boredom. And so I was going, I'm bored. I don't want to paint the same way. I painted this way for 10 years. You get a little nervous about it that people go, well, they may not like your new style. But it's not that it's that different usually. It's just that I guess life's like a spiral. You come around to the same things over and over, but you get deeper and deeper and deeper into it.
So what would you say to the people who kind of got comfortable, they've been doing the same thing 30 years in a row, they've been successful? Do you have, is that a wrong?
You know, if they're okay with it, I think it's okay. The question you have to ask yourself is, and this is where I think awareness is key. Are you really bored? Do you want to do the same thing over and over again? I mean, one of the reasons that I think people become artists is they don't want to repeat the same thing over and over again.
Right.
So, I mean, if that's where you are, and most artists are, I think, a little bit of risk takers. And we were talking about this last night. You know, it's not 100% one way or the other. In other words, if you have to earn a living and you need to paint paintings a certain way to keep your market up, we'll do 50% of that, and 50% take some risk on. Right. You know, it doesn't have to be 100%. And if you take
Everybody wants to make everything an either-or proposition, and it doesn't have to be either-or.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And it's like plein air painting. And so like I still go take a workshop once every 2 years. First of all, I love taking them.
Yeah.
I go there, I get there, and I'm like, nobody expects a thing of me. And that's the one thing I loved about workshops. I thought, nobody cares what I do. And everybody's so concerned about their other paintings, and especially if the workshop leader, teacher is going, we're here for you to learn. Nobody cares about what your painting looks like, and I really don't want you getting a product.
So one thing I hear a lot from people who do workshops is a lot of people will come to the workshop and they won't do what the instructor says. They're really just there to paint and be with other people. You ever experience that at all?
I don't experience that.
Because you don't let it happen.
Well, I think some people like go, well, gee, I came to your work, I think I had the first 2 workshops I taught, I had a college professor in there audit me. And I said, what do I need to be doing? And he said, first, slow down, you're giving out. He goes, they can't follow as much information as you're giving out. And so when you get into that process, you realize you got to slow it down some. The second thing was I had a psychiatrist in there, and her advice was, you need to take control of the class immediately. And that's how you run your class. And she goes, all of a sudden, everybody will get in line. And so from there, I have them paint along with me. So they're not bringing in something that it's more about the learning process than creating a picture of their grandkids or something. That's a different type workshop than the ones I run.
Right.
So
you want to talk about the no-fly list?
Oh. No, so listen, have you ever been trying to go on a vacation where they say like, well, we're going to be on a boat or something, it's a small group, and you go, well, what happens if there's somebody under you, you could ruin a whole vacation, and they go, oh, we'll give them their full refund and kick them off the ship. And so I always thought, I had one time where I had a person in one of my workshops that he was a bit annoying because he'd go over and try to tell other people what to do and everything. So I said, well, you keep it up, you're going to be on the no-fly list. You don't get to ever come again. So I think I've never had a problem since then. And I think it's because I listened to the psychiatrist and they said, explain to people what you think of them, what they expected of them, and that they're not allowed to go critique other people unless asked for. Things of those. So there's a little bit of rules when you set it up.
Right.
Like anything else.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important. You want everybody else to have a good time.
One person can, I was talking about your people. Your people are always nice and easy to be around. They're very good, and like you said, you got to catch it right away if somebody starts harassing somebody else.
Yeah.
Especially in a group endeavor. Let's say, we take trips. We go to Italy or France every year, so.
So when you've taught enough workshops now, how many have you taught totally? 120?
Over 150 easily.
Yeah. So what do you think then is the best track that somebody should go on to learn painting? And let's say that I'm a little bitty baby plein air painter. I've just barely figured it out, and I have the world before me. I have an opportunity to do anything. You've had your own experience in learning. You've had the chance to teach 150 workshops. So you're talking about 10, 15 people workshop. What is, to the person watching this, if they want to begin painting, what is your recommendation?
Okay, and so it's interesting you ask that because I get people like that are ready to go. And this is an interesting thing. Now I'm getting a pretty good number of retired doctors because they like verbal information in addition to the actual visual information. And so what they'll do is they'll set up where I'll probably teach 8 workshops a year. They'll go to a workshop maybe once every 3 months. They'll come back once every 3 months. Then they'll go back and work on it, then they'll come back. Now I always recommend, when you go back, be around people, get in a study group, and I'll even tell people that are from the same area, y'all get together. And so I make it a point to go to dinner so people have all the social contacts with everybody while I'm at the workshops, because that's critical to getting that support. So then they go work on it, and then they, I say, and get one of the videos. You can hear the same processes repeated over and over again, and then they come back, and then they do another one.
Well, it's amazing to me how much you forget.
Oh,
You can't possibly remember or take in everything. First off, you're concentrating on one thing, now a new concept gets thrown at you, and you're like, wait a minute, there's so much. So I think that's a very valid concept, is keep going back.
well, and it's interesting. You say you forget, but at the same time, you know what they say? Everybody has a game plan until they get hit in the face. Well, sometimes I'll be out there and I'll be painting by myself, a plein air painting, and all of a sudden I'll go, I don't know what to do with it right now.
Yeah.
And I stop and I go, let's say I'd walked up to somebody in the workshop, I go, what would I tell them? And I back myself back into what to do. And I've actually had to do that several. Nobody hits 100%. I painted with some really good painters, plein air, and I've seen, I know everybody thinks they all do, but every now and then you'll see somebody just not having a good day or a good week. I've had plenty of those.
So what are the essentials of a good painting?
I think, the more you look and the more you circle through, and everybody talks about this, design's critical, because you can't build something around a bad design. It's like building a building that's leaning over. You can't, no matter what you do to it, it's not going to look good. It's still going to be all crumpled up and falling down. So that's huge. The other thing, people always talk about values, and values do all the work, color gets all the credit. Mm-hmm. Well, I think the deal is this, is that the value portion, people use those words, but we really don't know what they're talking about unless it's really explained, and I tried to do that in this recent video real carefully. The big shape values, you can play with them and shift them so that all of a sudden that painting reads unbelievably better than before.
It vibrates.
It vibrates, and the light is exactly where it needs to be, and it's not taking you away from the focal area, and you can play with those. When you squint down and you're outside, you look, all you're getting is the order. What's the lightest, next lightest, darkest, next darkest, in between. You're not getting what range you're going to put them in. So when you get to the painting, you have to be willing to scrape off, wipe off, and get that value where that painting really reads really exceptionally well.
And that is one of the things I understand. I think I learned this from Albert Handel, is that the idea is putting a lot of colors next to each other of the exact same value, and it's a great way to create form, but also to create vibration. The tendency is to put colors that are not of the same value, and then it doesn't read right.
Right, the value won't hold. So you may see this. You may see people that are really detail, but they hold their big value shapes really well. And I think once you start getting those things working, the number one things that I shifted that I think really increased my sales a lot was really paying attention, and this is a strange sound, but to say there's energy in a painting. If I can get a painting to look energetic and exciting, I think that draws people in. Now you could do it with the layering of colors like I was talking about and you're talking about. You can layer the colors, but you can do that in pastel and watercolor.
Yeah, when you're layering color though, you're not, let's assume for instance you took an old painting, you sanded it down, but you left that color underneath to create some patchwork underneath. You let some of that shine through.
Right.
And that's when you're talking layering, you're not just covering everything, you're letting some of that bleed through. Is that right?
Exactly. So what you're getting is maybe a layer of an underneath layer, then another layer with some other colors, then another layer on top of that with some other colors. And in the video, I actually did this for this video shoot. I took pictures of some colors, then I took a picture of what it would really look like if it was layered, and then on top of the layers having energetic brush strokes running through there, that painting starts to really vibrate, get a ton of energy. It gets exciting to the viewer.
Is there a right time to lay down brush strokes energetic brush strokes, or is that throughout the whole process? Because there's a lot of different theories. For instance, one of the theories was that Sargent kind of painted the baseline of his painting, and then he went back and put all those remarkable brush strokes in kind of as finish work. I don't know if that's true. I don't think anybody knows. But, are you looking in your finished period where you're going to really lay in the brush strokes? Are you doing that throughout the whole thing?
I think it's better, like especially when you start, to have that loose flowing feel. So you start getting loose immediately. It used to be, when I was coming up, the idea was put it on and leave it alone.
Well, some people still believe that.
The problem is, and this is what I tried to get across, is that all painting's relative. So all your shapes shift when you add another shape. All your colors shift when you add another color. So I found the best way to get it the way you really want the painting to look is to go thin at first, get really loose, then come back in on a second layer. Now, you may tighten up a little bit through, then do a third layer, and finally a fourth finishing layer. Usually in the third and fourth layer, and only in the lit areas, not in the shade too much, do you start getting the thicker, stronger strokes.
So in the shade, the rule would be keep it thin, keep it simple?
Yeah, well, I mean, not simple, because the shadows need to also be lively.
So you still want that vibration in the shadow.
A lot of vibration. And warm and cool, but this is where people get confused on temperature. So they think warm means yellow and blue means cool. But you can have a warm yellow and a cool yellow.
For everybody's benefit, give an example of a warm yellow and a cool yellow.
So let's say you take a cad yellow medium. That's probably warmer than a lemon yellow, which is cooler.
Yeah.
The lemon yellow has more white in it.
Right.
White's obviously cool.
Right.
So those type things, but it's always interesting to me, like I was doing this video and I was shooting a mountain. It really doesn't have value shifts in it. Temperature shifts are creating the form in the mountain. So one part of the mountain's a warmer, more like a violet color, and the other one shifts a little more violet blue in the shade side. Not much value shift at all, so the whole integrity holds.
You know, the idea of color temperature is something a lot of artists struggle with. How do you teach it?
Well, I think the easiest way is to make sure they understand that it's all relative. In other words, so when I teach it, I'll go like this. Look, just exactly what we're talking like. I could take a yellow, let's say a golden ochre or some type of ochre, and then I could add a little wider buff titanium into it, and that cools that yellow off. So now I have a warm yellow that's it's warmer than the one I just cooled off. And that's the temperature shift. But I don't think you can say, it's very misleading to say, well, that's a warm color, that's a cool color. I think you always have to throw in this. That yellow is warmer than this other yellow that I just
Everything's
mixed.
about comparison, isn't it?
It's all relative and it's all comparison. That's why I think painting becomes difficult when you have to compare all these, and that's why I also think the 4 runs at it, you start, because the more you get on the painting and the more right things you get, then you know how to shift values and shift color temperatures.
So is there anybody throughout history that you've looked at, that you've studied, that is kind of doing what you're teaching?
You know, I don't know what they taught. Like I'm a big fan of Frank Tenney Johnson.
Yeah.
I have no idea what he taught.
Yeah. But you can see from his work what he was doing.
Yeah, you can see from it, but I still don't know how he went about getting there.
Right.
Now for me, and it became, and I was hanging out, who was I hanging out with? It was, you kind of have to, I've kind of extrapolated things from experiences and gone, well, what if I did it that way? Because it was always harder for me to do values and shapes. So I had to learn. Everybody else was going right to color and putting it on. If I didn't do a tonal and get my shapes and work on my shapes and values first, and I threw color into that mix, it was a mess. And if I take a workshop and I have everybody do a warm tonal or a value study, they all get better at their shapes and their values. And then they, in old art schools, they didn't add color till you're in year 3. Mm-hmm. But I've also learned too that I was hanging out, I think Michael Lynch and I were painting, he goes, yeah, if we just get this area, and he's a great painter.
No, he sure is.
And he's been around a long time, and he taught some really good people how to paint. He goes, if we just get this area right, we'll be okay. And then I kept thinking, you know what? That's how you line your values up. Go to the focal area and start working out, and you can nail your values and be in control, and you're not in the fear of having to deal with the whole painting at one time.
So let's talk about focal area, focal point, and composition. You talked about the importance of design. Are there particular things that you're looking for to accomplish when you're creating a composition? And then what are you doing to draw attention to that point, the focal point, if you will?
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting question, because everybody's heard this line. Underneath every great representational is a strong abstract design.
Right.
So you have to, when you look at values, and this is like pure, simple, just design things that keep things interesting. I had a little sheet that I drew up for the purpose of the video, and it showed 3 equally spaced values, different values, a medium, a light, and a dark. The most boring painting ever created. Then you have to, if you shift it to say over 60% of the paintings in a midtone, and then that leaves you 40%, but you've got to get above 50. 60 is probably a good number, maybe 65. Then if you use a dark area, you got 40% left, and over 60% of that's light, then that leaves you your dark. Those are the best abstract designs you can ever have. And so you build your painting trying to think about that. And so I did that in this video, and I think that's just a huge help. But if you don't have your focal area, you have no idea how to lead people to it. So when you're designing, once you figure out the focal area, you can start designing your painting so that angles and flows and objects move you towards that focal area.
Well, Sargent said that the thing he learned from his teacher, Carlos Durand, who was the big influence on his painting, was starting with middle values. And you're talking about, essentially sounds like you're talking about the same thing.
Well, I think that's a great thing, and because most of your painting's going to be in middle values.
Right.
But I think if you work from the focal out, and I think Richard Schmid said, and it's been said before, throw on your lightest light, your darkest dark, and then your easiest color and value, and get that focal area, and then you'll start building your middle values right off that real quick.
So do you start your painting with the thing that's most interesting you? So if you go out in the field and you find that farmhouse and that's going to be your focal point, you start with the farmhouse and then build everything else out?
Well, what I'll do is do a wash first. I'll get some type, but I know where that farmhouse is going to be located on the painting. Once I get kind of a wash on, and I designed it. Now I may use a warm tonal wash if there's a lot of shapes and I don't want to throw color in. Or I can do a real light color wash, but immediately, once that first arena's on there and I know where to go, I'll start working from that focal area back out.
Great.
Because it's so easy to adjust your values from it.
So what is one thing that you can say to people that will impact your painting the most if you concentrate on one thing? What is it going to be? Is it design, shapes, values, something else?
I'm not sure there is one exact
I'm
thing.
sorry, I'm not letting you off the hook.
I mean, you do have to have good design. But I also think if you start working from your focals out, you'll see a big difference because you're in control of your painting. I think the more confident you feel as you go through the painting, the better your chances are of success.
Yeah.
Because you have to build a belief that you can finish it. And if you start and you go, oh, I got this whole canvas to cover and I'm going to move all over the place, that's a scary thought process. But if it's washed in and you go, now I'm going to go here and work my way, you're in control. And I've also learned this, nobody likes it, but you go like this. What I figured out was when you're in that focal area and all of a sudden you hit a hard area, your tendency is to jump over here because that got hard,
Right.
and you go over here and you never resolve that issue.
Right.
If you stay with it and you keep resolving as you go out, everything gets easier and easier.
I also think your enthusiasm makes a difference, right? So if I walk out and I say, oh, I got to paint that barn is what I'm excited about. I want to get that barn down because I'm enthusiastic about it. If I start working on other parts of the painting, then I start getting bored or distracted, and then by the time I get around to it, I'm tired, I'm not as sharp. So if you get that focal point in early, that seems to make a difference.
Well, and I was never taught that. I don't remember ever being taught that. It was more like, let's get it all on and then put it on. And that, of course, those were workshops that were 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Things have shifted, but I think you're just dead on there. You're interested. Here's what it also does. Once you get that little 15 to 20% working, it frees you up to really take risk moving farther out in the painting, which gets really exciting.
So do you, C.W. Mundy always talks about you have your starring player and then you have your supporting cast and the others. So what he's essentially saying, I think, is, make your focal point sharp, your darkest dark, your lightest light, your brightest color, your brightest chroma, and then as you go out from there, everything gets a little softer, edges are softer, et cetera. Do you kind of go that route?
You kind of go that route, except for this. I think, that's generally, but if it's really interesting, if you look at for instance, a Bill Anton painting or a Frank Tinney Johnson, you'll have your supporting cast or secondary or tertiary part of interest, but there'll be a hard edge somewhere else directing you around the painting. Where those hard edges are put in is really exciting. You may look at an Anton painting every now and then and see a hard edge way up here in the cloud, and the center of interest down here where all those cowboys are riding that horse, and you go, that was ballsy. And it's very exciting.
Anton is definitely one of the great painters living today. Just incredible.
Yeah, he's got a beautiful setup. He moves the paint around, and that's what I'm also liking too. From putting it on and leaving it alone, I like now that I'm painting all over and moving the paint, and it starts to get this, and every now and then you'll get this happy accident, and you just
Right.
gotta keep from covering it up.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not just laying it down, it's shifting it around a little bit, you're pushing it around.
Yeah, and painting right on that thing, because that's game time, right?
Yeah.
Down here, it's like your practice session on the palette a little bit. And I also like the fact of moving, it used to be you could pre-mix all. I like the fact of having a bunch of color down there. I can move around and I can look at it all, so I can intuitively find my color. I'm not having to go a formula. I need a cad yellow here and this over here, and that's going to get, I've got all these other colors that I would have never thought of mixing that have all of a sudden gotten merged around down there.
Well, this is exciting because your first video we did about, 2 years ago?
2 or 3,
Two or
something like
three
that.
years ago. So you've had a lot of learning and a lot of chance to kind of change how you feel about things since then.
I think I have. And here's the interesting thing about it. You go like this, you go, well, after so many workshops and teaching, you go, well, I don't know if there's any other easier way to teach. Then you circle around and you go, oh my golly, you get a little bit deeper,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think the real people, the real masters that go, they just keep growing and growing and growing. Every time you come back, it's the same stuff, but you come around, you go, there is an easier way.
Yeah.
There's a deeper way. There's an easier way that makes this complicated process simpler.
Well, Bill, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Great group of people out here doing this.
Thank you. Well, you get to see Bill Davidson. What an honor to have him in the studio. I'm Eric Rhodes with Plein Air Magazine. Thanks for watching today. Well, that was Bill Davidson and Painting Simplified. And you can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. And remember that special discount hiding out in the comments section. Thanks for watching today. I'm Eric Rhodes.
In Painting Simplified, artist Bill Davidson's purpose is to teach you how to create an expressive, energetic, and exciting painting that goes way beyond the subject matter. What Bill shows you here is relevant to every landscape painting you'll ever do in your lifetime. It's a compilation of everything he has learned through his years of being a professional artist and what he has taught others in over 150 workshops that he's led. Bill has distilled many different processes and created proven systems that you'll find easier and faster to apply than what you're doing now.
And I want to take some risk because this is an educational video, and I want to show you what it's like to really come in and take some risk. And you know the saying that goes, values do all the work, color gets all the credit. Well, I'm going to show you why that really is. I used to think it just meant that values were like the darkness in the trees and the light, and they are. But what they're really talking about, and it's just taken me a long time to figure this out, is that the more you play with the values in the ground plane and the sky, and the more you focused in on your focal area and you're playing with those values, then you can set your mood up in your painting and really create a more dramatic painting.
You'll find Bill's color systems easy to use without the complications of most color theory teachings. Next, Bill demonstrates how to paint in stages, critical if you want to simplify your process while still creating knockout paintings. He'll also share some of the neuroscience behind how artists talk to themselves, sometimes self-sabotaging their efforts. Get your self-talk right, and you'll be painting more simply and joyfully. If you'd like to sell your art or sell more of it, you don't want to miss what Bill did to double his sales in just 1 year. This is information you can put to work for you right away. Holding nothing back, Bill brings you his best in Painting Simplified. Available now on DVD or digital to view on your computer, tablet, or smartphone.